My name is Garrett Thorne, and this is the day I should have died. The canyon air hit my lungs in short, burning gasps as I ran through the scrub brush, my Winchester rifle clutched against my chest. Sweat stung my eyes. The New Mexico sun was already high at 10 in the morning, turning the red rocks into ovens and the shadows into dark promises of relief I couldn't afford to stop for. 3 shots. That's all I had left in the chamber. 3 bullets between me and whatever was making that sound up ahead. A sound I recognized from years of living alone on the edge of Apache territory. The sound of a man dying. 10 minutes earlier, I'd been doing what I did every morning, fixing fence posts along the southern edge of my property, where the wire always came loose because the summer heat warped the wood and the winter cold cracked it. Simple work, predictable work, the kind of work that didn't ask questions and didn't expect answers. I lived for that kind of work now. The fence ran along 240 acres of hardpan desert that I'd bought with Army discharge pay and 22 years of silence. I was 42 years old enough to know better, young enough to still make the same damn mistakes. It wasn't much. Enough grass for 30 head of cattle when the rains came. Enough isolation that I didn't have to see another human face for weeks at a time if I chose not to. And I always chose not to. I was wrapping wire around a post when I heard it. A yell, sharp, desperate, coming from the direction of Dry Canyon about a mile east toward the place where the land dropped away into a gulch carved by floods that hadn't come in 5 years. I stopped, stood still. The wind pulled at my shirt collar. I told myself it wasn't my business. Told myself that getting involved in other people's trouble was exactly how a man ended up with a bullet in his back or a noose around his neck. Told myself I had my own problems, and God knows I did. Today was April 15th, 1884. The last day I had to pay Samuel Crow $800 or lose everything I owned. The land, the cattle, the small timber cabin I'd built with my own hands 3 years ago when I first came out here to disappear. I had $750 folded in my saddlebag, the result of selling 15 head of cattle that morning to a buyer from Alamogordo at a price I knew was too low, but I'd taken it anyway because I was out of time. I needed $50 more, just 50, and my plan had been simple. Ride into town before 5 o'clock, find Reverend Miller at the church, borrow the rest, pay Crow, keep my land, keep my life. That was the plan. Then I heard the second scream. This one wasn't a yell. It was something deeper, a sound that came from a place beyond pain, beyond fear. The sound a man makes when he knows death is close and he's trying to warn it away with his voice alone. I thought about my brother Daniel, thought about the way he'd sounded in those final seconds before I pulled the trigger, and before I could stop myself, before I could talk sense into my own fool head, I was running. I unwrapped the reins from the fence post, swung up onto my bay gelding, and kicked hard toward the canyon. The horse knew urgency when it felt it. We moved fast, hooves pounding the dry earth, mesquite branches whipping past my face as I leaned low over the saddle. It took 5 minutes to reach the rise above Dry Canyon. My horse pulled up short on its own, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. I saw why immediately. Below us, in the bottom of the gulch where the shadows were still thick and cool, a grizzly bear stood over the body of a man. The bear was huge, bigger than any I'd seen in 10 years of living out here. Its fur was matted and dull, ribs showing through the hide like the bars of a cage. A starving animal. The most dangerous kind. It had one massive paw pressed against the man's chest, holding him down, and its head was lowered as if deciding where to bite first. The man wasn't moving much. I could see blood pooling beneath him, dark and spreading into the cracked dirt. His clothes marked him as Apache, older, gray threaded through long black hair that had come loose from its tie. I didn't think. Thinking would have stopped me. I dismounted in one motion, pulled the Winchester from its sleeve on my saddle, dropped to one knee behind a stand of mesquite, and took aim. The first shot hit the bear in the shoulder. It reared back, roaring, a sound that echoed off the canyon walls and sent birds exploding from the rocks above. The bear turned toward me, trying to locate the source of the pain. I didn't give it time. The second shot caught it in the throat. Blood sprayed. The animal stumbled, tried to roar again, but the sound came out wet and broken. The third shot I placed right between its eyes. The grizzly dropped. One moment it was a mountain of fur and rage. The next it was just dead weight hitting the ground with a sound like a sack of grain thrown from a wagon. Silence rushed back into the canyon. No wind, no birds, just my own breathing and the faint metallic smell of blood on the air. I waited 30 seconds. Standard practice. Making sure the animal was truly gone and not just pretending. I'd seen a wounded elk get up once and gore a man who'd approached too soon. The man had died screaming. When I was sure, I stood and walked down the slope, rifle still raised and ready. The Apache elder wasn't moving when I reached him. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven gasps. Blood had soaked through his shirt and into the earth beneath him, turning the dust into dark mud. Deep claw marks ran from his shoulder down across his ribs. The bear had opened him up like a butcher working meat. I knelt beside him, keeping one eye on the bear's corpse. Put 2 fingers against the old man's neck. His pulse was there, but weak, thready. The kind of pulse that said a man had maybe an hour if he was lucky, maybe minutes if he wasn't. His eyes opened, clouded with pain but still focused, still aware. They found my face and held there without fear, without pleading, just watching me, measuring me. He spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, but the words came out in clear English. "White man," he said, "you have Chiricahua eyes." I stared at him. That made no sense. I was as white as snow, Irish and Scottish stock, with none of the bronze skin or sharp features of the Apache people. "You're confused," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You're hurt bad. I'm going to get you out of here." "No," he whispered. "Your eyes, they see, like my people see." I didn't have time to argue with a dying man's visions. I set the Winchester aside, got my arms under him as carefully as I could, and lifted. He was lighter than I expected. All bone and sinew, the weight of a man who'd lived hard and eaten little. He groaned when I moved him, but he didn't scream. Tough. Apache warriors were raised to endure pain without giving their enemies the satisfaction of hearing their suffering. This man had that training deep in his bones. I carried him up the slope to where my horse waited. The gelding tossed its head, nervous from the smell of bear blood and human pain, but it held steady while I draped the old man across the saddle and climbed up behind him, one hand on the reins, one arm around his chest to keep him from sliding off. The ride back to my cabin was slow. Every step the horse took jarred the old man's wounds. I felt his breathing grow more labored against my arm, felt the blood soaking through my shirt sleeve, warm and sticky. By the time we reached the cabin, it was past 11. The sun was directly overhead now, brutal and unforgiving. I'd missed my window to ride into town and still make it back before the bank closed. Missed my chance to borrow that last $50 from Reverend Miller. Missed my chance to save my land. But I couldn't think about that now. Couldn't let myself calculate what I'd just lost by choosing to save this stranger's life. I kicked the cabin door open with my boot and carried the old man inside. My home was simple. One room. Timber walls chinked with mud and grass. A stone hearth on the north side. A single bed in the corner. A table with 2 chairs. Everything a man needed and nothing he didn't. I laid him on the bed as gently as I could. Lit the oil lamp even though it was daylight, because I'd need to see clearly for what came next. Put water on to boil over the fire. Found my needle and thread, the bottle of whiskey I kept for occasions exactly like this, and a clean knife from the drawer. I'd done this before. Sewn up wounds on battlefields when I was younger. Back when I wore a cavalry uniform and followed orders, I should have questioned more. Done it for men who died anyway despite my best efforts, and for men who lived long enough to shoot at me later when the war turned them into enemies. This was no different, just meat and thread, and the hope that infection wouldn't set in before the body had time to heal itself. I cut away his shirt. The bear had torn through skin and muscle, carved 4 deep furrows from shoulder to sternum, but the claws hadn't broken bone, hadn't punctured the lung. If I could stop the bleeding and keep the wounds clean, he had a chance. Not a good chance, but a chance. I washed my hands in the boiled water, then began cleaning the wounds. The old man groaned when the hot water hit torn flesh. his body going rigid. "Yeah," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. "That part's going to hurt." I worked for over an hour. Hands steady, focus absolute, the way I used to focus when I was tracking Apache raiders through the mountains, and one missed sign could mean death for my entire patrol. Each stitch had to be tight. Each section of torn muscle had to be aligned properly, or it would heal wrong and leave him crippled. 47 stitches in total. I counted each one. When I was finished, I packed the worst sections with clean cloth soaked in whiskey and splinted his left arm, which had twisted at an angle that suggested the bone might be cracked even if it wasn't broken clean through. It wasn't pretty work, wouldn't pass inspection by a trained surgeon, but it would hold. I sat down in the chair by the fire and watched him breathe. In and out. Shallow, but steady. His face had gone pale beneath the bronze of his skin, but he was alive. Outside, the sun continued its arc across the sky. I could feel time moving, could feel each minute taking me further from the deadline I'd needed to meet. By now, Samuel Crow would be sitting in his bank office, checking his pocket watch, waiting to see if I'd walk through that door with the money I owed. By now, Reverend Miller would be wondering why I hadn't shown up at the church to ask for that loan. By now, my last chance to save my land was slipping away like water through fingers. I poured myself a cup of water from the basin and sat by the bedside. The old man's eyes were closed now, his breathing more even, unconscious. Maybe that was better. Let the body do its work without the mind interfering, telling it how much pain it should be feeling. I hadn't asked who he was. Didn't know if his people would come looking for him. Didn't know if they'd be grateful or angry to find him here in a white man's cabin, sewn up with white man's thread. Didn't much care either way. I'd done what needed doing. Couldn't leave a man to die alone in a canyon, torn apart by a starving bear. Not after everything I'd already left behind. Not after Daniel. That was enough. The old man didn't speak for 3 days. I didn't expect him to. His body was too busy fighting infection and trying to knit itself back together to waste energy on words. I checked his bandages each morning, replaced the whiskey-soaked cloths with fresh ones, and spooned thin broth between his cracked lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. He took what I gave him, turned his head slightly when I dabbed sweat from his forehead, but he never tried to talk, never tried to sit up. Just lay there, breathing, existing, while his body decided whether it wanted to keep living or give up. His eyes stayed sharp, though. I noticed that. Even when he was half delirious with fever, his gaze would track me as I moved about the cabin. Watching. Measuring. Like he was trying to figure out what kind of man I was based on how I moved, what I touched, how I held myself when I thought no one was paying attention. I kept to my routine as much as I could. Fed the horses. Checked the fence lines, though I didn't bother fixing anything. What was the point? In a few days, this land wouldn't be mine anymore. Hauled water from the creek, boiled more broth. The work steadied me, always had. But there was a different weight to it now. The sound of another person breathing in the room. The sense that someone was present, even if they never said a word. I hadn't lived with another human being in the same space for 14 years. Not since I left the army. Not since Daniel died. It felt strange. Not bad. Just strange. On the morning of the 4th day, I came in with an armload of dry wood and found the bed empty. My chest seized. I dropped the wood, loud clatter against the floor, and scanned the room fast. The door hadn't been touched. My rifle still rested against the wall where I'd left it. No signs of struggle. No blood trail leading outside. Then I heard movement near the hearth. The old man had pulled himself out of bed somehow, dragged himself across the floor, and now sat cross-legged by the fire. His back was to me, shoulders hunched forward with the effort of staying upright, but he wasn't collapsed, wasn't delirious. He was staring into the flames like a man looking for answers. "You should be down," I said, keeping my voice even. Didn't want to startle him into moving too fast and tearing his stitches. He didn't look up. Didn't seem offended by the suggestion either. Just sat there, breathing slowly, firelight playing across his weathered face. Then he spoke for the first time in days. His voice was low, graveled from disuse, but clear. You did not ask who I was. I stood still, holding the wood I'd picked back up, unsure how to answer that. Figured you'd tell me if it mattered, I said finally. The old man nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he already suspected about me. It matters, he said. I crossed the room and crouched near the fire, but kept a respectful distance. The air smelled of wood smoke and the bitter herbs I'd been steeping in water to help with his fever. Outside, wind pressed softly against the shutters, a sound so familiar now I barely heard it anymore. My name is Nashota, the elder said. My people are 10 ridges east, past the rocks shaped like broken teeth. I knew the place. Had ridden near it once 2 years back when I was tracking a lost calf. Hadn't gone close. The Apache didn't take kindly to white men wandering near their settlements without invitation, and I hadn't been looking to get myself killed over a $20 animal. You're a long way from home, I said. I was hunting, Nashota replied. Alone. The bear found me before I found game. He paused, drew a careful breath that made his ribs shift beneath the bandages. You saved my life. That is seen. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the weight he was putting on those words. Did what anyone should do. Nashota turned his head then, really looked at me for the first time. His face was sharp with age, lined deep by sun and wind and years of living hard, but his eyes were steady, dark and clear and measuring. No, he said. Not anyone. He didn't explain what he meant by that. Instead, he asked for water, and I helped him back to the bed. His legs were too weak yet to support his weight for long. He moved like a man made of spun glass, careful and slow, aware that one wrong step could shatter him. That was all. He slept the rest of the day, and I went back to work, trying not to think about the fact that tomorrow was April 18th. 3 days past my deadline. 3 days since I'd failed to pay Samuel Crow. 3 days since I'd lost my land. That night, I didn't sleep well. Kept waking to check on Nashota, listening to his breathing in the dark, making sure it stayed steady. Kept seeing Daniel's face in the shadows. Kept hearing Crow's voice in my head, imagining what the banker must have said when 5 o'clock came and went without me walking through his door. The next morning, I woke early, before dawn. That thin gray light that comes just before the sun breaks the horizon, when the world is still deciding whether it wants to be day or night. I reached for the kettle, thinking about coffee, thinking about chores, thinking about nothing at all. Then I stopped. Someone else was in the cabin. She sat near the cold fireplace, back to me, hands folded in her lap. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard footsteps, but she was there, as real as the floor beneath my feet and the table in front of me. I sat up slowly. My hand moved by instinct toward the rifle leaning against the wall beside the bed. The woman didn't turn around. Didn't move at all. Just waited. Her skin was bronze from sun and heritage both, visible even in the dim light. Long black hair fell loose down her back, decorated with 2 thin leather strips that had fallen forward over her shoulder. She wore a deerskin dress, the kind Apache women made from hides tanned soft and supple. But this one was torn. The strap on her left shoulder hung loose, half detached. A long rip ran up the side from hem to thigh, showing the curve of her leg. Not torn from wear, torn from violence. There was a small leather satchel by her bare feet, dust on her ankles and calves. She'd walked a long way to get here. I pulled on my shirt slowly, quietly, trying not to startle her, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. You lost? I asked, keeping my voice low. She turned her head, not her whole body, just enough that I could see her profile in the growing light, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips pressed together in a line that suggested she'd learned not to speak unless absolutely necessary. Her eyes met mine, dark, wide, unblinking, and completely empty of fear. That's what struck me most. She wasn't afraid, wasn't nervous, wasn't anything, just present, like someone who'd already been through every version of fear the world could throw at her and had come out the other side too tired to feel it anymore. No, she said simply. I studied her face, tried to read what she wanted, why she was here, who'd sent her, but her expression gave me nothing. "You hungry?" I asked, because it was the only thing I could think to say. A beat passed, long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then she gave a small nod. I made her food. Eggs from the 3 chickens I kept in a pen behind the cabin. Bread I'd baked 2 days ago, now hard enough to need soaking in water to soften. Some dried meat from a deer I'd shot last month. Not much, but what I had. She ate quietly by the hearth while I sat across the room, watching, trying to understand. When she was finished, she stood and faced me properly for the first time. The torn dress shifted as she moved, revealing more of the damage, more tears, more signs of rough treatment, but she didn't try to hide it, didn't pull the fabric closed or turn away. She just stood there, waiting. "My name is Kaya," she said. The sound of her voice was soft, steady, like someone who'd decided that if she was going to speak, she'd do it with precision, wasting no words on things that didn't matter. I waited. "Nashota sent me," she continued. "He is my grandfather. He believes a life saved must be honored. In our tradition, sometimes this is done by sending a woman." Every muscle in my body went tight. I stood slowly, not from anger, but from something that felt too close to it for comfort. "I didn't do it for that," I said. "I didn't save him so I could get some kind of payment." "I know," Kaya said. No hesitation, like she'd expected me to say exactly that. I looked at her, really looked now, searched her face for shame, for resentment, for any sign that she'd been forced here against her will. Found none of those things. What I found instead was something harder to name, a tightness around her eyes, a set to her jaw that spoke of someone who'd already lost every argument that mattered and had stopped trying to win new ones. This wasn't a gift. It was an exile. She'd been sent here under the banner of honor and tradition, but really she'd been cast out, discarded, given away because her people didn't know what else to do with her, and she knew it. "You don't owe me anything," I said, forcing the words out past the anger building in my chest. Not anger at her, anger at whoever had made this decision. "You can go." "I will stay if you allow it," she said. The words came out measured, calm, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. "If you do not allow it, I will leave." "You got somewhere else to go?" "No." That one word hung in the air between us, heavy as a stone, final as a grave. I rubbed a hand over my mouth, felt the rasp of 3 days of stubble against my palm, looked at her bare feet, at the worn satchel, at the tired curve of her shoulders that said she'd been carrying weight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. She had nowhere to go, no one to return to, and if I turned her away, she'd walk into the desert, and that would be that. "You can stay," I said finally, "but you're not mine. You understand? You're not payment. You're not property. You're just a person who needs a place to sleep." Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, but something close to it, like a door that had been locked for years, suddenly finding itself unlocked. "I understand," she said quietly. I took the extra blanket from the shelf and handed it to her without another word. She accepted it with both hands, nodded once, and lay down on the floor by the fireplace, folded her body beneath the wool like it was more warmth than she'd felt in months. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the dying embers in the hearth. Nashota had sent her, to repay a debt I'd never asked for, and now I had a woman in my cabin who'd been thrown away by her own people. A woman with torn clothes and bare feet and eyes that had seen too much. A woman who'd just told me she had nowhere else to go. I lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling beams I'd cut and placed myself 3 years ago, listened to her breathing slow and even out as she fell asleep, and I wondered what the hell I'd gotten myself into. The morning came without sound. I'd risen early like always, boots laced tight before the sun touched the window, coat pulled over my shoulders against the lingering chill that spring mornings always carried in the high desert. I didn't look toward the fireplace right away. Didn't want to. But I heard the shift of fabric, the small exhale of someone stirring from sleep, and I knew she was still there. Kaya hadn't moved much during the night. She lay curled beneath the blanket I'd given her, one hand resting under her cheek, her body turned slightly toward the fireplace where the embers had gone cold hours ago. Her dress had shifted higher on her thigh while she slept. Not indecent, but enough that I looked away quickly. Not because I was ashamed, because I knew what it meant for a man like me to look too long at a woman in that state, a woman who'd been sent here, a woman with nowhere to go, a woman who might mistake attention for expectation. I stepped outside to let the morning air clear my head. The chill bit through my coat. The land stretched out in all directions under a pale sky just beginning to show hints of gold along the eastern ridge. Same as always. Wide. Empty. Quiet in a way that used to bring me peace but now just felt like waiting. I walked from the cabin to the barn, checked on the horses, filled their water troughs from the barrel I kept topped off from creek runs. The work steadied my hands, gave my mind something to do besides circle around the fact that everything had changed in the span of 5 days. 5 days ago, I'd been alone. 5 days ago, my biggest problem had been finding $50. 5 days ago, I hadn't saved an old Apache man from a bear, and I hadn't woken up to find his granddaughter sitting in my cabin like a debt payment I'd never asked for. By the time I came back inside, Kaya was awake. She sat on the floor with her knees pulled up, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her long hair had fallen forward, hiding most of her face. She wasn't crying, wasn't speaking, just sitting, waiting. The way people wait when they've learned that nothing they do will change what comes next. I moved slow, took a pot off the shelf, started a fire in the stove with kindling and the last of yesterday's coals. "You drink coffee?" I asked. A pause. Long enough that I thought maybe she didn't understand. Then quietly, "Yes." I poured 2 cups once it was ready, handed one to her without ceremony. She took it in both hands, held it like the warmth mattered more than the taste. Her fingers were rougher than I'd expected, calloused, the hands of someone who'd worked hard, not the soft hands of someone who'd been sheltered or treated gently. I noticed a mark on her left wrist, red, partially healed, the kind of mark a rope leaves when it's been tied too tight for too long. I didn't ask about it. We sat like that for a while, me at the table, her on the floor. The silence between us wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. Just 2 people who didn't know what to say to each other yet. Finally, I broke it. "Why you?" She looked up, eyes finding mine, waiting for me to clarify. "If Nashota has a whole tribe," I said, keeping my voice even, "why send you? Why not someone else?" Her lips parted. The answer didn't come fast, like she was deciding how much truth to give me, or maybe just deciding if I was worth the effort of explaining. "They say I make men nervous," she said finally, "that I am too quiet, that no warrior ever asked for me to be his wife." I frowned. "Because you don't talk much? Because I do not smile when they want me to smile? Because I do not pretend?" She paused, took a sip of coffee. "Because I was taken once, 4 years ago. Traders. They kept me for 6 days before selling me to Fort Union. The officer there refused to buy me, said I was too damaged, too thin. My people took me back, but I was not the same. I could not be the same." The words came out flat, factual, like she was recounting something that had happened to someone else. No emotion, no bitterness, just truth laid bare. I set my cup down slowly. "So they sent you here," I said. "To me." "To honor my grandfather," Kaya corrected, "but also to remove me. I had become extra, in the way. My mother was a healer. She died last winter. After that I had no place, no husband, no children. And I would not marry a man who wanted me only because other men had already broken me." She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. I leaned back in my chair. Let that settle. I'd known men who'd been cast out by their own. Soldiers who drank too much. Drifters who came back from battles too changed to fit into the lives they'd left behind. Men who wandered until they either found a new purpose or stopped wandering altogether in a grave somewhere. I hadn't thought about it happening to women, but of course it did. Different reasons, same result. "You want to go back?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, Then, very quietly, "No." "Why not?" Her eyes held mine, steady, clear, no hesitation this time. "They never asked me to stay." Those 5 words hit harder than any speech could have. I felt them settle in my chest, felt the weight of what she wasn't saying, what she'd lived through, what she'd survived only to be told she didn't belong anymore. I didn't have a response to that, so I just nodded. The hours passed quietly after that. She helped me carry water from the creek without being asked, moved like someone who understood work, who knew the value of making herself useful, not out of obligation but out of habit. I offered her shoes, an old pair left behind by a ranch hand who'd worked for me one summer 2 years back and then drifted on. She accepted them with a small nod. I showed her where the food was kept, the tools, the spare clothes in the trunk at the foot of my bed. She began tidying things without instruction, not out of subservience, out of understanding, a kind of silent agreement between 2 people who were used to being alone and didn't quite know how to be anything else. That night, I laid out the bedroll beside the fire. "You can sleep here," I said. "Don't have to stay on the floor." She moved slowly, lay down on the bedroll with her back to the flames, pulling the blanket over herself carefully. Her hair spilled across the thin pillow I'd given her, dark against pale fabric. Before I turned in for the night, I asked the question I'd been holding back all day. "That mark on your wrist," I said quietly. "Who gave it to you?" Kaya didn't answer for a long time. So long I thought maybe she'd fallen asleep. Then barely a whisper, "A traitor, 4 years ago, before my people took me back." My jaw tightened. "They took you back after that?" "Yes, but only halfway." I understood what she meant. They'd given her food, shelter, the basic necessities of survival, but they'd never given her back her place, never treated her like she was whole, like she still mattered. I lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, listened to her breathing and thought about all the ways people found to hurt each other. All the ways we convinced ourselves that cruelty was justified if we wrapped it in tradition or necessity, or the idea that some people were worth less than others. That night, sleep came hard. When it finally did, I dreamed of Daniel. Dreamed of the moment I'd pulled the trigger. Dreamed of his eyes looking up at me with understanding and forgiveness I didn't deserve. And when I woke in the gray light before dawn, Kaya was still there, still breathing, still present, still choosing to stay in a place where no one had ever asked her to before. The wind came strong on the 6th morning. It rattled the cabin walls, sent dust curling across the yard in spiral patterns, and shook the cottonwood trees behind the barn until their branches creaked like old joints protesting movement. I stepped out into it with my collar turned up and my hat pulled low, breath showing faint in the air that still carried the night's chill. Spring in the high desert was always a battle between seasons. Warm one day, bitter the next. The land couldn't seem to decide what it wanted to be, so it tried everything and settled on nothing. I fed the horses in silence, moved through the morning routines like clockwork, hay in the troughs, fresh water from the barrel, a quick check of their hooves for stones or cracks. Work that required hands but not much thought, which suited me fine because my mind wasn't still. Inside the cabin, Kaya was moving again. I could hear her through the open door, the soft sounds of someone cleaning without being asked, folding what little laundry there was, stirring the fire back to life with kindling and breath. She'd been here 4 days now, and we still hadn't spoken more than a few dozen words total. But her presence had filled every corner of the place. She never asked what was hers to touch, never waited for permission. She just moved through the space like someone who understood that survival meant making yourself useful, making yourself small enough not to be a burden, but visible enough to prove your worth. I noticed things about her, small things, how she tied her hair now in 2 thick braids that hung down her back instead of leaving it loose, how she'd taken needle and thread from my repair kit and stitched the tears in her dress with careful, even stitches that were almost invisible unless you knew where to look. How she sometimes stood at the small window on the south wall and stared out at the empty land for long minutes with no expression on her face, like she was watching something far away that only she could see. That afternoon I brought back kindling from the woods behind the property and found her sweeping the far corner by the stove. She straightened when she saw me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw something close to hesitation in her expression. "May I stay longer?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but steady. I blinked. It wasn't a question I'd expected. We hadn't talked about her leaving, hadn't set a timeline. I'd just assumed she'd stay until she figured out where else to go, or until something changed. "Ain't nobody told you to leave," I said. "I know. I wanted to be sure." I studied her face. Her eyes didn't plead, didn't beg. They just waited, patient and ready, like she'd learned long ago that hope was dangerous but asking was sometimes necessary. "You want to stay?" I asked plainly. "Yes." "Then stay." She gave the faintest nod. Something in her shoulders relaxed. Not much. Just enough that I could tell she'd been holding tension I hadn't noticed until it released. That day we worked side by side for the first time. One of the corral fence rails had cracked during the winter, weakened by ice, and then finished off by one of the horses leaning against it too hard. I'd been meaning to replace it for weeks, but kept putting it off because it was the kind of job that went faster with two people. Kaya held the new rail in place while I hammered in the nails. Didn't say a word. Didn't complain when splinters caught her palms or when the work made sweat line her forehead. Just held steady and waited while I worked. When the job was done, she stepped back, breathing heavy, chest rising beneath the patched deerskin of her dress, and looked out at the land beyond the fence. "It is quiet here," she said. "Yeah. I like quiet." "So do I." We walked back to the cabin together, not talking, just moving in parallel, our shadows stretching long across the dirt as the sun dropped lower in the western sky. Inside, I poured water into the basin for washing. She stepped past me to grab a cloth from the hook by the door. Her hand brushed mine for just a second. Barely contact, just skin against skin for a heartbeat. I didn't move. Neither did she. Our eyes met. I didn't look away this time. Didn't pretend I hadn't noticed. Her gaze held mine, searching for something. Testing, maybe. Trying to read whether the touch had meant anything or if it was just accident. There was a pause. Thick and slow. Like the air itself had stopped moving and was waiting to see what happened next. Then she gently took the cloth from where it rested near my hand, dipped it in the water, and began wiping the dust from her arms. Methodical. Careful, like nothing had happened at all. That night we ate dinner at the same table for the first time, not with one of us on the floor and the other at the chair, both sitting, both using plates, both present in a way we hadn't been before. I handed her the bread. She passed me the beans. It wasn't romantic, wasn't formal, but it was something. A shift. An acknowledgement that we were sharing space now, not just occupying it separately. After the meal, she sat on the floor again by habit, folding her legs under the blanket, but I brought my chair closer to the fire this time, close enough that we were in the same circle of warmth instead of divided by the room's cold middle. "Kaya," I said. Her name felt strange in my mouth. I'd been avoiding using it, avoiding the intimacy that came with naming someone directly. She looked up. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked. She didn't ask what I meant. She knew. The question was whether she wanted to let any of it out, whether she trusted me enough, whether speaking the words would make the memories more real or less. After a long silence, she answered. "When I was taken," she said slowly, "they tied me to a wagon, made me walk behind it for 4 days. My wrists bled. They fed me scraps, laughed when I stumbled. When we reached Fort Union, the officer looked at me like I was livestock. He said I was too bruised, too thin, not worth the price they were asking." My throat went tight. I kept my face still, but inside something dark and angry was coiling. "My people came for me after the traders left me there," she continued. "Took me back. Let me sleep in my mother's lodge. Fed me. But I was not the same to them. My body had been touched by white men. I was no longer clean, no longer good." "You are good," I said. The words came out harder than I meant them to. She didn't respond right away, just stared into the fire. "You are not dirty," I added, forcing my voice lower, steadier. "You are not broken. You are not something less than human because of what was done to you." Her voice cracked just slightly, barely noticeable, but I heard it. "But I was given to you like a debt," she whispered, "like payment for something owed." "You were not given," I said. "You were sent. There is a difference." She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes shining with something that might have been tears if she'd let them fall. I leaned forward slightly, not crowding her, just closing the distance enough that she'd know I meant what I was about to say. "I did not accept you as payment. I let you stay because you had nowhere else to go, and I could not turn you away. That is all." We sat quiet for a long time after that. The fire cracked and popped. The wind outside pressed against the shutters. And slowly, carefully, her hand moved out from beneath the blanket. She reached toward me, not grabbing, not demanding, just extending her hand until it rested lightly on top of mine where it lay on the arm of the chair. She did not hold it, did not squeeze, just placed her palm there, warm and trembling slightly, like she was testing whether I'd pull away. I did not move. Let her hand stay. Let the warmth of her skin sink into mine. After a long time she whispered, "I am not afraid now." I looked into the fire, watched the flames dance and consume the wood. My hand stayed where it was. My breathing stayed even. "Then you are safe here," I said quietly. Honest. Final. It was the first night she did not sleep on the floor. I laid out the bedroll beside my cot, close enough that we could hear each other breathing, but far enough that there was no assumption, no expectation. When I woke in the morning, her hand was still resting near mine. Not clinging, not claiming, just staying. The next day broke clear and cold. No wind this time, just stillness and the kind of silence that made every sound carry twice as far as it should. I was outside mending harness leather when I heard the horses coming. 3 riders, moving slow but deliberate along the path that led from the eastern ridge toward my property. I stood, set down the leather and all, and watched them approach. My hand moved by instinct toward the rifle leaning against the barn wall. Kaya appeared in the cabin doorway. She'd heard them too. Her face had gone carefully blank, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the doorframe. The riders stopped at my fence line. 2 stayed mounted. The third, a man in his early 30s with a face carved from stone and eyes that burned with controlled fire, swung down from his horse and walked toward me. He was Apache, tall and lean, dressed in a mix of traditional clothing and pieces scavenged from white settlements. A rifle across his back, a knife at his belt, and a bearing that said he knew how to use both. Kaya stepped out of the cabin, moved fast, almost running. She stopped between me and the man, and I saw recognition flash across her face. "Dakota," she said. Not a greeting, a statement, like she'd been expecting this but had hoped it would not come. The man, Dakota, looked at her for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to me, cold, measuring, deciding whether I was worth killing or just worth hating. "You are the one who saved Nashota," he said. His English was good, better than good. Educated somewhere, probably one of the mission schools. "I am," I said, "and you are the one who took my sister." I felt Kaya stiffen beside me, felt the weight of that accusation settling over us like a net. "I did not take her," I said evenly. "Nashota sent her. I gave her a place to stay. That is all." Dakota's jaw tightened. "She was supposed to return after 3 days. It has been 6. What have you done to her?" "He has done nothing," Kaya said, her voice sharp now, harder than I'd heard it before. "He gave me a choice, something you never did." Dakota's eyes snapped to her. Something painful moved across his face, anger mixed with something that looked like guilt. "I protected you," he said. "You decided for me," Kaya shot back. "You and the council and everyone else. You decided I was too damaged to marry, too quiet to be useful, too broken to belong. You never asked what I wanted." Before Dakota could respond, an older voice cut through the tension. "Enough." Nashota appeared from behind one of the mounted riders. He moved slowly, still healing, but his presence carried weight that had nothing to do with physical strength. The old man walked forward, leaning slightly to one side where the bear had torn him, and positioned himself between Dakota and me. "This man saved my life," Nashota said, looking at his grandson. "He asked for nothing, expected nothing. When I sent Kaya to honor that debt, he refused to treat her as payment. He gave her shelter, safety, choice." Dakota's hand twitched toward his rifle. "And what does he want in return?" "Nothing," I said. Met his eyes directly. "I want nothing from her. She stays because she chooses to stay. If she wants to leave with you right now, I will not stop her." Dakota turned to Kaya. "Then come home." She did not move. "Kaya," Dakota said, softer now, almost pleading, "you are my sister. You belong with your people." "I belong where I am seen," Kaya said quietly. "Where I am asked instead of told, where my choices matter." The silence that followed was heavy, painful. I could see the struggle on Dakota's face, the part of him that wanted to drag her back by force warring with the part that understood what she was saying. Finally, Nashota spoke again. "There is something else you should know, Dakota. Something about this man." Dakota's attention shifted back to the old man. "4 years ago," Nashota said, "you were being escorted to Fort Union as a prisoner. Do you remember?" Dakota's expression darkened. "I remember. You were wounded. The cavalry officer in charge ordered his men to leave you behind, to let you die on the trail." "I remember that too," Dakota said bitterly. "One soldier disobeyed," Nashota continued. "He came back for you, carried you, bandaged your wounds. Because of him, you lived long enough for our people to find you and bring you home." Dakota stared at Nashota. Then slowly, inevitably, his gaze turned to me. "You," he said. Not a question, a realization. I said nothing, just stood there feeling the weight of a past I'd tried to bury coming back to demand recognition. "The officer who gave that order," Nashota added, "was Captain Eli Harris. He court-martialed this man for disobedience, for saving an Apache life. That is why Garrett Thorne lives out here alone, why he has no rank, no pension, no connection to the army that once claimed him." Dakota's face had gone very still. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it now, something complicated and uncomfortable. "Why did you not say this before?" Dakota asked me. "Because it does not matter," I said. "I did not save you so you would owe me. I saved you because leaving a wounded man to die was wrong, just like saving Nashota was the right thing to do. I do not keep score." The two mounted warriors had dismounted now, were standing close enough to hear everything. One of them, an older man with gray streaking his long hair, spoke up. "If this is true, then we owe this man more than we knew." "It is true," Nashota said firmly. "I was there. I was scouting for the army at that time, before I left their service. I saw what happened. I saw Harris order Garrett to abandon Dakota. I saw Garrett refuse." Dakota stood very still for a long moment. Then he did something I did not expect. He walked forward until he was standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the conflict in his eyes, and he extended his hand. "I owe you my life," he said, "and I owe you an apology for what I thought about you and my sister." I took his hand, firm grip, brief, then released. "You owe me nothing," I said. "But if it helps, you should know something else." Dakota waited. "The man who gave that order 4 years ago, Captain Harris. He is not just a memory. He is here, in New Mexico territory. He is the sheriff of Alamogordo now." I watched that information land, watched Dakota's expression shift from surprise to something darker. "And he works for a man named Cyrus Langford," I continued, "a land baron who wants my property. They have been making my life difficult, threatening me, and I believe they will not stop until they get what they want or until someone stops them." Nashota stepped closer. "What are you saying, Garrett?" I took a slow breath, let it out. "I am saying that in 2 days I have to pay Cyrus Langford $1,200 or he will take my land." And I suspect that even if I pay him, Harris will find another way to destroy me because I made him look weak 4 years ago. Men like that do not forget. They do not forgive." Dakota was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Nashota, then back at me. "How much money do you have?" he asked. 600, I said. "Nashota brought me that much already, but I need twice that." Dakota nodded slowly. Then he turned to the 2 warriors with him and spoke rapidly in Apache. They responded, a quick back and forth I could not follow. Then Dakota turned back to me. "I can give you 600 more, he said. "Our people have been trading furs and crafted goods. We have saved money for emergencies. This qualifies." I stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my life. Because you have treated my sister with respect when our own people did not. And because if Harris is here, he is a threat not just to you, but to all of us. Men like him do not stop with one injustice." He paused, then added, "But I have one condition." "What condition?" Dakota looked at Kaya. "Let her choose, right now, in front of all of us. If she wants to stay with you, I will accept it and help you. If she wants to come home, you let her go without guilt or anger." I turned to Kaya. She was standing very still, looking at her brother, then at me, then at the ground between us. "Kaya," I said quietly, "the choice is yours. It always has been." She raised her head, looked at Dakota first. "You are my brother," she said. "I love you, but you sent me away. You and the council decided I had no value to our people anymore. You wrapped it in honor and tradition, but you were removing me." Dakota flinched, did not deny it. Kaya turned to me. "Garrett asked me nothing, expected nothing. When I offered to work, he let me. When I was silent, he did not demand words. He is the first man in 4 years who looked at me and saw a person instead of something broken." She took a breath, steadied herself. "I choose to stay, not because of debt, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want to." Dakota closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were wet, but no tears fell. "Then I will stand with him," he said quietly. "And when we face Harris and Langford, you will see that your brother can still protect you, even if it means accepting that you no longer need him to." Nashota stepped forward and placed a hand on Dakota's shoulder. "This is growth," the old man said gently. "This is what it means to love someone, to let them choose their own path, even when it is not the path you would choose for them." The afternoon sun was starting to descend when Dakota and his men finally prepared to leave. But before they mounted their horses, Dakota pulled a leather pouch from his saddlebag and handed it to me. $600, he said. "Count it if you need to." "I trust you," I said, taking the pouch. "We will return in 2 days," Dakota said. "When you go to town to pay Langford, we will go with you. Harris may try something. It is better if you are not alone." I nodded. "Thank you." Dakota looked at Kaya one more time. "Be safe, little sister." "I will," she said. After they left, after the dust from their horses had settled and the sound of hooves had faded into the distance, Kaya and I stood in the yard together. "You did not have to choose me," I said. She looked up at me. "Yes, I did, because you were the first person who let me choose at all." That night, we sat by the fire again. Closer this time. She asked me to tell her about Daniel, about what happened, about why I carried so much guilt for something that sounded like it had been beyond my control. I told her, all of it, how Daniel and I had enlisted together, how we'd fought side by side, how in the chaos of a battle near Glorietta Pass, he'd been shot by one of our own men in the confusion, how he'd begged me to end it because the pain was too much and the wound was too severe, and we both knew he was dying anyway, how I'd put my pistol to his head and pulled the trigger because it was the last mercy I could give him, how the army had called it murder even though every man there knew the truth, how I'd run rather than face a court-martial that would have ended with a noose. "You did not kill him," Kaya said when I finished. "You released him. The law sees it differently. The law is made by men who have never had to make that choice," she said. "You loved your brother. You gave him peace. That is not murder. That is love. I looked at her, at this woman who'd been broken by the world and put back together wrong according to everyone else. This woman who somehow saw me more clearly than I'd seen myself in 14 years. "How do you do that?" I asked. "Do what?" "See past all the darkness. See something worth saving." She smiled, small and sad and true. "Because someone finally did that for me," she said, "and now I know what it looks like." We sat in silence after that. Her hand found mine. This time I held it back. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be forgiven. The seventh morning came with a sky the color of old bruises. Dark clouds hung low over the mountains to the west, promising rain that might or might not come. The air felt heavy, thick with moisture that made every breath feel like work. Today was the day. I woke before dawn, as I always did, but this time the weight on my chest was not guilt or loneliness. It was anticipation, the kind that comes before a fight you know is coming and cannot avoid. The kind that makes your hands steady and your mind sharp, because there is no room left for doubt. Kaya was already awake. She sat by the window, dressed in the cotton dress I'd given her 3 days ago. She'd mended it carefully, stitched the torn shoulder strap with thread she'd pulled from an old shirt of mine, and somehow made it fit her like it had been sewn for her body alone. Her hair was braided tight, pulled back from her face in a way that made her look older, harder, ready. "You do not have to come," I said, pulling on my boots. She did not turn from the window. "Yes, I do. Langford and Harris are dangerous men. If things go wrong, if there is violence, I need to know you are safe." Now she looked at me. Her dark eyes held no fear, only certainty. "I have survived traitors who beat me, an officer who called me livestock, a tribe that threw me away. I can survive whatever happens today." I could not argue with that, did not try. I strapped on my gun belt, checked the revolver to make sure it was loaded, and slid my Winchester into its saddle sleeve. Kaya watched me arm myself without comment. She had seen enough violence to know that sometimes it was necessary. Sometimes it was the only language certain men understood. We ate a quick breakfast of cold biscuits and coffee. Neither of us spoke much. There was nothing left to say. The plan was simple. Ride to Alamogordo. Meet Dakota and his men at the edge of town. Walk into the bank together. Pay Langford his $1,200. Get the deed to my land. Leave. Simple. Clean. Straightforward. Except I knew it would not be that easy. Men like Langford did not give up power willingly. Men like Harris did not forgive old humiliations. They would have a plan, a countermove, something designed to take everything from me even if I gave them what they wanted. I was counting on it. By the time we rode out, the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds in thin, watery streams. The land looked different in this light, harsher, less forgiving, like it was showing its true face instead of the one it wore when the weather was kind. We rode in silence for the first hour. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm against the hard, packed earth. Kaya sat her horse well, back straight, hands light on the reins. She had grown up riding, I could tell. This was not a skill she had learned recently. This was something deep in her bones. "What will you do if they refuse to give you the deed?" she asked finally. "I will make them give it to me." "How?" I glanced at her. "However I have to." She nodded, accepted that, did not ask me to be more specific because she understood that some things could not be planned, could only be responded to in the moment. We reached the meeting point an hour before noon, a stand of cottonwood trees at the junction where the north road met the trail into Alamogordo. Dakota was already there with 4 men. Not the 2 who had come to my ranch, but different ones. Younger, harder looking, warriors who carried themselves like they had seen combat and were not afraid to see it again. Dakota nodded when he saw us approach. "You brought the money?" I patted the saddlebag where both leather pouches rested. $1,200 in gold and silver coin. Everything I had, everything Nashota and Dakota had given me. My entire future compressed into metal that weighed heavy against the horse's flank. "I brought it," I said. "Good." Dakota looked at his men, then back at me. "We will go in with you. Stay close. If Harris tries anything, we will be ready." "I do not want bloodshed," I said. "Neither do I. But I will not let him destroy you the way he tried to destroy me 4 years ago. Some debts require payment. This is one of them." We rode into Alamogordo together. 7 riders moving in formation down the wide main street. People stopped to watch. Shopkeepers came to their doorways. Children pointed. It was not every day that a white rancher rode into town flanked by Apache warriors and a woman who looked like she belonged to both worlds and neither. The bank sat at the end of the street, a 2-story building made of adobe and wood with bars on the windows and a heavy door that suggested the men inside dealt in things worth stealing. Samuel Crow's name was painted on a sign above the entrance in letters that had started to fade from sun and weather. We dismounted, tied our horses to the rail outside. I could feel eyes on us from every direction, feel the town holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Stay here," I said to Kaya. "No." I looked at her. She looked back, unmovable. "If I stay outside, they will think I am yours. Property you left behind while you conduct business. I will not be seen that way. I go in with you, or I do not go at all." Dakota made a sound that might have been a laugh. "She is right. And besides, if there is trouble, it is better if we are all together. Harder for them to separate us. Harder to pick us off one by one." I could not argue with the logic, did not have time to try. "Fine," I said, "but stay behind me. All of you." We walked through the door together. The inside of the bank was dim after the brightness outside. It took my eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, I saw Samuel Crow behind his desk at the back of the room. A small, round man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the kind of face that suggested he had spent his entire life counting other people's money and resenting them for having it. But Crow was not alone. Cyrus Langford sat in a chair beside the desk, tall and lean in his black coat, silver watch chain catching the light from the oil lamps. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built his wealth on the backs of others and felt no shame about it. And standing against the wall to the left, arms crossed, badge gleaming on his chest, was Sheriff Eli Harris. He had aged since I last saw him, more gray in his hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting at horizons and holding grudges. But I recognized him immediately. Would have recognized him if 20 years had passed instead of 4. His eyes found mine, held there, and I saw the recognition in them, saw the old anger flare up fresh and hot. "Garrett Thorne," Harris said. My name sounded like an accusation in his mouth. "I wondered if you would actually show up." "I am here to settle my debt," I said evenly. "Nothing more." Langford stood slowly, smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Oh, I am afraid it is more complicated than that now, Mr. Thorne. You see, the debt has increased somewhat since we last spoke." I felt Dakota tense beside me, felt Kaya's hand brush against my arm in warning. I kept my voice level. "We agreed on $1,200. I have $1,200. "That was the amount 3 days ago," Langford said. "But there have been additional expenses, late fees, interest, security costs for holding the deed. The total now stands at $2,000. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and poisonous. "That is not legal," I said. Harris pushed away from the wall. His hand rested on the butt of his pistol, casual, threatening. "It is legal when I say it is legal," he said. "I am the law in this town, Thorne. Or did you forget that during your years of hiding out in the desert like a coward?" "I did not hide," I said. "I survived. There is a difference." "You ran," Harris spat. "You disobeyed a direct order. You undermined my authority in front of my men. You made me look weak. And then you deserted rather than face the consequences." "The consequence would have been a noose for showing mercy," I said. "For saving a wounded man's life. That is what you wanted. To hang me for having more humanity than you did." Harris's face went red. His hand tightened on his gun. But before he could draw, Dakota stepped forward. "I am the man he saved," Dakota said. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of stone. "I am the Apache prisoner you ordered him to leave behind, to let die in the dirt like an animal." Harris's eyes widened, just slightly, enough to show that he had not expected this. "And I am here," Dakota continued, "to tell everyone in this room that Garrett Thorne is a better man than you will ever be, that he risked everything to do what was right while you hid behind regulations and cruelty." "This is not your business, Indian," Langford said. "This is between me and Thorne." "You made it my business when you tried to steal from a man who saved my life," Dakota shot back. "When you used legal tricks and corrupt lawmen to take what does not belong to you." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I could feel it pressing against my chest. Could see Harris's hand trembling slightly on his gun. Could see Langford calculating odds, trying to figure out if he could win this confrontation or if he needed to back down. Then the door behind us opened. Everyone turned. Nashota walked in slowly, leaning on a walking stick carved from mesquite. He moved like a man who had aged a decade in the week since the bear attack, but his eyes were still sharp, still seeing. And behind him came 3 more people. Reverend Miller from the church, a woman I recognized as the school teacher, and an older man in a suit who I did not know but who carried himself with the bearing of someone important. "Gentlemen," the suited man said, "my name is Judge Harlan Winters. I have just arrived from Santa Fe on circuit court business, and I have been informed that there may be some irregularities occurring in this establishment." Langford's face went carefully blank. Harris straightened, his hand falling away from his gun. "I do not know what you have been told, Judge," Langford said smoothly, "but this is a simple matter of debt collection. Mr. Thorne owes me money. I am here to collect it." "The original debt was $800, Judge Winters said. "I have seen the paperwork. Samuel Crow filed it with the county clerk as required by law. But I have heard from multiple sources that you are now demanding $2,000. That is usury, Mr. Langford, and it is illegal." Crow made a small choking sound. Langford shot him a look that could have melted iron. "Furthermore," Judge Winters continued, "I have received some very interesting correspondence in the past few days, letters from a woman in Kansas, a widow named Elizabeth Merritt." I saw Harris go very still, saw the color drained from his face. Judge Winters pulled a folded packet of papers from his coat pocket. "Mrs. Merritt's late husband was Captain James Merritt. He commanded the cavalry unit that both Sheriff Harris and Mr. Thorne served in during the Apache campaigns of 1880. According to these letters, which Captain Merritt wrote to his wife before his death, Sheriff Harris court-martialed Mr. Thorne not for desertion or cowardice, but for disobeying an illegal order." The judge unfolded one of the letters. Read from it in a clear, carrying voice. Harris ordered Thorne to abandon a wounded prisoner and let him die. Thorne refused. He went back and saved the man's life. Harris used his authority to punish this act of mercy because he could not tolerate being disobeyed. The court-martial was a sham, an abuse of power. I have documented all of this in hopes that someday the truth might clear Thorne's name. Silence fell over the bank. Heavy, absolute. Harris looked like he might be sick. Langford's smile had vanished completely. "These letters were sent to me by Nashota," Judge Winters said, gesturing to the old Apache man. "He visited Mrs. Merritt before coming here, asked her for any evidence that might exonerate Garrett Thorne. She gave him everything her husband had written, and now that evidence is part of the official record." I stared at Nashota. The old man met my eyes and nodded slightly. This had been his plan all along. This was how he had chosen to repay the debt, not with money or a woman sent as payment, but with justice, with truth. Judge Winters turned to Harris. "Sheriff, you obtained your position by claiming honorable service in the Army, but these letters prove you lied under oath about the circumstances of Mr. Thorne's departure. That makes your appointment invalid. As of this moment, you are relieved of duty pending a full investigation." Harris opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the room like he was searching for an escape that did not exist. Then he did something desperate. He drew his gun, not pointing it at the judge, not at me, at Kaya. "Nobody moves," Harris said. His voice shook, but his hand was steady. "Nobody does anything, or the woman dies." Everything slowed down. I saw Dakota start to move, saw one of his warriors reach for a knife, saw Judge Winters step back in shock, but I was faster. I had spent 4 years preparing for this moment without knowing it. 4 years of living alone, practicing my draw, keeping my skills sharp because some part of me had always known that the past would catch up eventually, that Harris would find me, that this confrontation was inevitable. My hand moved, smooth, practiced, automatic. My revolver cleared leather, came up, aimed, fired, all in the span of a single heartbeat. The bullet caught Harris in the shoulder, spun him around. His gun discharged into the floor as he fell, hitting the boards hard and staying down. The sound of the gunshot echoed in the small space, deafening, final. I kept my gun trained on Harris as he writhed on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Not a killing shot, not meant to be, just enough to stop him, to end the threat without ending his life. "Anyone else?" I asked quietly. No one moved. Langford stood frozen, hands raised slightly, eyes wide. Crow had ducked behind his desk. The warriors had their weapons out now but held them low, waiting for a signal from Dakota that never came. Judge Winters recovered first. He moved to Harris, kicked the sheriff's gun away, and called for someone to fetch the doctor. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, looking at me with something that might have been respect, "I believe you acted in defense of another. That will be noted in my report." Judge Winters called for the doctor. Within minutes, 2 deputies arrived and carried Harris out on a stretcher, his shoulder bleeding but not life-threatening. The judge pulled me aside later. "Harris will recover," he said. "He'll stand trial in Santa Fe for fraud, perjury, and abuse of authority. I expect he'll serve 10 to 15 years in territorial prison." And Langford? Left town within the hour. A deputy spotted him riding west toward the Arizona border. Judge Winters sent a telegram to the U.S. Marshal in Tucson. "Langford's wanted for fraud in 3 territories now. He won't be back." I nodded. It was over, truly over. 2 months later, the land looked different. 1 month after Nishada's death, on a bright Sunday morning, Reverend Miller married us. The ceremony was small. Dakota stood beside me as witness. 3 of his warriors attended, along with the school teacher and a handful of townspeople who'd come to respect what Ember and I had built together. Ember wore a dress she'd sewn herself. White cotton with Apache beadwork along the collar and sleeves, the patterns her mother had taught her as a girl. When I slipped a simple silver band onto her finger, one I'd bought from the trading post in Alamogordo, she smiled. "Now I am Ember Thorne in truth," she whispered. "Not just in name." "You've always been Ember Thorne," I said, "from the moment you chose to stay." By autumn, Ember's belly had begun to swell with new life. She moved slower, tired more easily, but smiled more often. She sang while she worked in the garden, old Apache songs her mother had taught her, and I found myself humming along even though I didn't know the words. On a cold November morning, when the first snow dusted the distant mountains, she woke me before dawn. "It's time," she said quietly. I sent word to Dakota immediately. He arrived with a healer from his tribe, an older woman who had delivered dozens of children and carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had seen birth and death and understood both. The labor lasted 14 hours. I paced outside, useless and terrified, listening to sounds I couldn't interpret and couldn't help with. When it was finally over, when I heard the baby's first cry, the healer opened the door. "You have a son," she said. "Both mother and child are well." I walked into that cabin a different man than the one who'd walked out. I nodded, holstered my gun, turned to Langford. "I have $1,200, I said, "the amount of the original debt. You will take it. You will give me the deed to my land, and then you will leave this town and never come back. Do you understand?" Langford looked at Harris bleeding on the floor, looked at Dakota and his warriors, looked at the judge who was now watching him with narrow eyes that promised investigation and consequences. "I understand," Langford said quietly. He turned to Crow. "Give him the deed." Crow scrambled to comply, pulled a folded document from his desk drawer, handed it to me with shaking hands. I unfolded it, read it, made sure it was genuine. Then I took the 2 leather pouches from my saddlebag and dropped them on Crow's desk. "Count it," I said. He did, his fingers fumbling with the coins. When he finished, he nodded. $1,200. Then we are done here. I turned to leave. Kaya fell in beside me. Dakota and his men formed up around us. A protective formation. A statement that we were together. That anyone who wanted to hurt one of us would have to go through all of us. We walked out of the bank into afternoon sunlight that had broken through the clouds while we were inside. The street was full of people now. They had heard the gunshot, had come running to see what happened. They parted for us as we walked to our horses. No one spoke. No one tried to stop us. We mounted up and rode out of Alamogordo the same way we had come in. Together. Whole. Victorious in a way that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with truth finally being heard. 2 months later, the land looked different. Not because it had changed. The desert was still the desert, still hard and dry and unforgiving. But my eyes had changed. The way I saw it had changed. It was no longer a place to hide. It was a place to build. Kaya and I stood on the porch in the evening light, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and red and purple. The kind of sunset that made you believe the world was more beautiful than brutal, even when you knew better. She had stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen this place, chosen me, chosen a future that she built with her own hands instead of one that was given to her by people who did not see her worth. We had worked hard in those 2 months, repaired the cabin, fixed all the fence lines, planted a small garden behind the house where she grew herbs and vegetables the way her mother had taught her, built a second room onto the cabin for storage and tools, and eventually, maybe, for something more. Dakota visited once a week. He and I had become something like friends, something like brothers. He taught me Apache words. I taught him how to repair harness leather. We did not talk much about the past, did not need to. The present was enough. Nashota had passed 2 weeks ago, quietly in his sleep. Kaya had cried for 3 days. I had held her and let her grieve and understood that some losses cannot be made smaller with words, can only be endured. Before he died, Nashota had told me something, had pulled me aside one afternoon when Kaya was working in the garden and said, "You gave her a choice. That is the greatest gift a man can give. Greater than gold, greater than safety. You gave her the power to decide her own life. Do not ever take that from her." I had promised him I would not. Had meant it then, meant it now. "Garrett," Kaya said quietly, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked at her. "I want to ask you something." "All right." She turned to face me fully. The sunset light caught in her dark hair, turned her skin to bronze and gold. She was beautiful, not in the way men usually meant that word, but in the way that mattered, strong and real and entirely herself. "Do you remember when I asked you if I could stay longer?" she said. "I remember. I want to ask again, but differently this time." I waited. "I want to stay forever," she said. "Not as your helper, not as someone you saved, but as your wife, if you will have me." My throat tightened. I had thought about this, had known it was coming, had prepared myself for it. But hearing her say the words still hit me like a physical thing, like something solid and real that I could hold on to. "You do not have to ask," I said. "You already belong here. You already belong with me." "I know," she said. "But I wanted to ask anyway, because belonging is not the same as choosing. And I want you to know that I choose this. I choose you. Not because I owe you, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because you are the first man who ever made me feel like I was worth choosing back." I reached for her hand, held it between both of mine. "Then yes," I said. "Yes, I will marry you, if you are sure this is what you want." "I am sure." "Then I only have one condition." She looked at me, curious and cautious. "I want to give you a new name," I said. "If you will let me." Her eyes widened slightly. "What name?" "Ember," I said. "Because when I found you, everyone had tried to put out your fire. They thought you were nothing but ash. But you were not. You were still burning, still glowing, And you taught me how to do the same." Tears filled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Ember Thorne," she whispered. "I like that." "Ember Thorne," I repeated. "My wife." She leaned against me. I put my arm around her. We stood like that for a long time, watching the sun go down over land that was ours now, truly ours. Not because of money or law or tradition, but because we had fought for it, had chosen it, had built something here that was worth keeping. 6 months after that, on a cold November morning, Ember went into labor. Dakota brought a healer from his tribe. The woman worked with Ember for 14 hours while I paced outside the cabin, useless and terrified in a way I had not been since the war. When it was finally over, when I heard the baby cry for the first time, when the healer opened the door and told me I could come in, I walked into that cabin a different man than I had been when I walked out. Ember lay on the bed, exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny, squalling thing with bronze skin and dark hair and lungs that worked just fine. "A son," she said. I sat beside her, looked down at the baby, at this new life that had not existed before. This proof that the world could create as well as destroy, that love could build something real and lasting. "What should we call him?" Ember asked. I thought about Daniel, about Nashota, about all the men who had shaped my life and then left it too soon. "Daniel," I said. "Daniel Nashota Thorne. So he knows where he comes from, and so he knows that love is stronger than loss." Ember nodded. "Daniel Nashota Thorne. It is a good name, a strong name." She handed him to me. I took him carefully, terrified I would drop him or hold him wrong or somehow break this fragile, perfect thing. But he fit in my arms like he had always belonged there, like this was what my hands had been made for all along. "Hello, Daniel," I whispered. "Welcome home." And for the first time in 14 years, I understood what that word really meant. Home was not a place, not a building or a piece of land or a set of borders on a map. Home was this: a woman who had chosen to stay, a child who carried our names and our blood and our hope for the future, a life built from nothing but will and work and the stubborn refusal to let the past define what tomorrow could be. I had spent so long running, so long hiding, so long believing that I did not deserve happiness or peace or anything good. But Ember had taught me different, had shown me that redemption was not something you earned through suffering. It was something you accepted when you finally learned to forgive yourself, when you finally understood that the mistakes you made did not define your worth, that you could be more than the worst thing you had ever done. Outside, the sun was rising over the New Mexico desert. The land was waking up to a new day, the way it always did, the way it always would. And inside that small timber cabin, a family sat together in the golden morning light. A rancher who had learned to stop running, a woman who had learned to choose her own name, and a baby who would grow up knowing that he was wanted, that he was loved, that he belonged. That was enough. That was everything. That was home. The end.